Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a set of cards that's allowing me to use a few stamp sets that I was hoping to get a bit more use out of. Although this Altenew Label Love stamp set is new, and basically I wanted to create some cards with Spanish sentiments because one of the places that I donate cards to would like more Spanish cards. So that's why I purchased that stamp set and why I wanted to use it today, but I wanted to combine it with a few things in my stash that I felt like could get a little bit more love. So I have this cling background stamp with all kinds of dots and a really fun pattern, and that's from Hero Arts. I'm going to use it to make a pattern paper, and I'm going to place it as a background with these stamps from Clearly Besotted. I believe the stamp set is called Hot Stuff, and it includes a bunch of dragons. There are 5 dragons in the stamp set, so I'm going to make 5 cards, one with each of the dragons, and I stamped a bunch of sentiments from the Altenew set, but I'm just going to pick 5 to go with the 5 cards that I'm going to make today. I have my cling stamp loaded in my regular size MISTI. I took out the mouse pad part and put the cling side down on the bottom of the MISTI. I'm going to tape my paper to the door of the MISTI. Then I will use some ink on the cling stamp and then press my paper to the stamp as opposed to my stamp to the paper, which is what you might more traditionally use. I'm using Distress Oxide ink. A couple of reasons. It might not be the ideal stamping ink. However, it's a larger size pad, and that makes stamping a background much easier. Now, many people own large ink pads, but I don't use a ton of colored ink, I find, so I generally collect the mini ink cubes. When I'm stamping a background, stamping with a mini ink cube can get a little time consuming and a little frustrating, and then I don't maybe stamp as many as I'd like. So I like to pull in these bigger ink pads, and it gives me another thing to do with my distress inks, my distress oxides. They do stamp backgrounds nicely, so no reason not to use them. Because they have a little bit of a pigment base, they're part pigment ink, they can take a little more time to dry than a dye ink if that's what you're used to working with, which is what most of my colored inks are. Also, like all distress inks, they do react with water. Here you can see that I was able to get a good impression with just 2 stamps of the MISTI while using a cloth to help me press the stamp down. Standing up can also help give you good pressure, and when you're stamping a background, there's a lot of surface to cover versus, just a small sentiment stamp where you have to, just kind of put a little pressure over that particular area. I find that having a cloth can be really helpful. I know that in a similar vein, Jennifer McGuire has recommended using a dry erase eraser, and I think she got that idea from someone else as well, as she credited them, and I don't remember who it was, but I also think that's a great idea. Just anything that you have on hand, though, that's cloth can be quite helpful. So I'm going to do my Copic coloring of the little dragons. I'm just going to color one dragon for you on camera, but I'm going to use the same colors to color all of the dragons. There's going to be little variations, like the one with the egg. I'm going to have to pull in some extra colors for that. But for the most part, I can make the choice of colors one time, yet use every image from the stamp set. And I really like that idea. I like to make sure that I get good use out of a stamp set, and one way to do that is to color all the images in a stamp set. Clearly Besotted makes a lot of stamp sets where there's a bunch of images of the same type, like generally the same animal, a bunch of sloths or a bunch of cats. MFT does the same thing sometimes. What's great about those stamp sets is you can pick colors and then use them repeatedly, like I mentioned I was doing here. I'm using YG 17, 13, and 11, caps off to the side there, of course. I'm going to create a strong shadow on one side of my critter and make my shadow areas relatively small so that I have a lot of highlight area. This is the technique that I'm enjoying the most lately, and I think adds a good amount of depth to the image without being overly complicated. So I just do a little line. I'm going to choose a left shadow area on this particular critter. This is not a scene card, so there is no specific light source. However, by just choosing a light source, it adds some depth and dimension. After I colored the image one time, went in and added just a bit more of the shadow color to deepen the shadows a bit. I find having a nice deep shadow makes your coloring pop a bit more. Some of the areas that I'm going to use these yellow-red markers, or orange, but they're called yellow-reds, they're YRs in the Copic world. YR 27, 24, and 23. I know that last one's a little hard to see. Some areas I'm going to do shading, like the horns, and then other areas like his belly and his wings, I'm not even going to shade. I'm just going to color solid, and his feet as well. And that's just because, in general, when you have done some nice shading to parts of your image, you can get away with doing not so much shading in another part, and it won't really be noticeable because it won't draw the eye. The eye will instead be drawn to the part of the image where you did do a little bit more interest. So if you want to save yourself some time, that's one thing that you can certainly give a shot to, see if you like it. You know, color some parts solid, some parts really simple, and then other parts of your image more detailed. In general, I would say choose the small areas to skip the detail in. Once I had all of my images colored, I cut them out with my scan and cut. I generally don't buy coordinating dies. I do have a video on my channel that talks about how to use the scan and cut in case that's something you're interested in. I'm going to use some colored cardstock for the base. I definitely don't always do this. I use a white cardstock for my base a lot, but I had this gray cardstock that I think went well with the gray ink that I chose for my background stamp. And I find that the 110, this is 110 pound Recollections cardstock. I find that it's decent for card bases. I used the white for a long time. I recently switched over to Accent Opaque just because it's a little bit of a brighter white, which I personally prefer. But I will cut it, the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper in half and then score it. I personally sometimes score on both sides. I know that's not always recommended, but I find that to be quite helpful. And then I will place the image on that background stamped piece and I will pop it up just a little bit, and I'll do the same with the sentiment. And as you can see, I'll get 5 technically different cards because I can switch out which dragon I use and which sentiment I use, but I didn't have to make 5 different card designs. And so hopefully the kiddos that get these cards will appreciate it. I did like that this was a nice gender neutral design. I think anyone will enjoy these cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll leave you links in the video description below to the products that I used. Have an awesome day.